Hello, my name is JT Wheatley, and this is the History of the Comic Books Podcast, Episode 0. A little about myself. I'm a proud resident of the upstate of South Carolina, and have been a comic book fan for as long as I can remember. As I got older and my collection got bigger, totaling around over 6,000 issues now, I got more interested in the history of how comic books were made and who made them. I'm also a bit of a history geek, and more recently have become a bit of a podcast geek. As a result, I started looking for a podcast that focused on the history of comic books, and I couldn't find any. While there are many great comic book podcasts, and more than a few that touch on the medium's history, I have yet to find one that covers in depth the history of this great art, particularly those who did it. Therefore, like Mike Duncan of the History of Rome podcast, or Laszlo Montgomery of the China History podcast, I decided to do this myself. It helped to have some local friends like the Joneses of the Nerdblitz podcast or Tyler Butler on Enough to BS podcast who decided to start their own. That being said, here we go. First off, we must address what is a comic book. It should be noted that comic books are a medium, not a genre, meaning that they are a delivery form of entertainment such as TV, movies, and or radio. Genres are a kind of entertainment, such as horror, comedy, or romance. Granted, the superhero genre has dominated the medium of comics for some time, as it will this podcast, but it does have a great history of other genres as well, which we will touch on. Now, over the next few episodes, we're going to go over the general history of comic books to serve as a spine, and then jump back for more detailed episodes on specific subjects. So getting started, the origin of comic books starts with sequential art, which is simply the use of a series of pictures to tell a story. This is an art as old as humans itself, beginning with the first cave paintings that depicted mammoth hunts, Greek pottery which was decorated with the art depicting their stories and myths, and Egyptian hieroglyphs, including the Book of the Dead, which used a combination of art and words to detail their history and how to perform mummification. Around the 12th to 13th century in Japan, some illustrated scrolls appeared that is considered the origin of manga, the Japanese form of comic book. Around the same time, stained glass windows in churches cropped up around Europe depicting religious stories. Another fantastic example of sequential art is the Bayview Tapestry, currently in display in the Bayview Museum in France. Credited to his wife and queen Matilda, it depicts William the Conqueror's conquest of England over a 200-foot by 20-inch tapestry. The style of comics and cartoons started appearing in Italy with caricature, or caricatures, which is an Italian form of satirical painting. This style was made popular by Harlot's Progress by William Hogarth in 1732. In 1792, Comic Magazine would feature pictures of Harlot's work, though wholly text. Character Magazine would later appear, popularizing the use of the word balloon, which is basically a little word above a character detailing what they were saying. This is something that also appeared in Ben Franklin's editorial cartoons for his Gazette. Yes, the same Benjamin Franklin who helped found the United States of America and tame lightning, among many other accomplishments, he also helped innovate comic books. That man was a show-off. In 1826, what is considered the first comic strip, The Glasgow Looking Glass, first appeared. Charles Dickens was also an innovator in the genre, with some of his earliest works being Sketches by Boys in 1836 as part of his legendary Pickwick Papers. In 1842, the first comic book first appeared, The Adventures of Obadiah Oldbuck by Rudolph Taylor. It should be noted this comic book still used text narration over word balloons, meaning that all the words were actually below the picture and not actual word balloons themselves within the panels of the comic book. In 1843, Punch cartoons first appeared by John Loesch. Around this time, pulp dime novels first started to appear, and while not comic books, their heroes and stories, from The Shadow to Tarzan, who first appeared in 1912, would go on to inspire many comic books we love today. On May 3, 1884, the first comic book strip, Alice Slopper's Half Holiday, appeared and is significant for being the first strip with a regular character. On May 17, 1890, Comic Cuts first appeared by Amigated Press, which collected strips into one comic, much like modern-day trades collect comic books, and would run until 1953. After a threat of copyright lawsuit, it eventually started employing its own work when it was revealed that many of the strips they were using were from other artists. In 1892, the Youth Department was published by Inner Oceans, which features the first color printings of comic books. At this time, the comic strips started to rise, with Popeye, Little Orphan Annie, and Dick Tracy, who got his first strip in October 1931, all started to appear. Most notably was Little Nimoy by Winsor McCay, which used color not just for color alone, but psychological effect in his storylines. In January of 1929, the Funnies first appeared, which was like the comic supplement that came free with newspapers, or more importantly, like in the Sunday paper we get today, but was sold separately for 10 cents. However, considering you can get this for free in the newspapers, it quickly failed. But it should be noted that issue number 4 featured the first known female authors as Victoria Pazine. Tarzan also got his same first strip at the same time. On February 1934, the first modern comic book appeared called Famous Funnies from publisher Charles Gaines, the founder of Educational Comics, which would later be known as EC. It was still a collection of strips, but its format is the first that would be instantly recognizable today as more of a magazine format with a separate cover and a much smaller than typical newspaper format. On June 11, 1934, Lee Falk's Mandrake the Magician first appeared in his own comic strip, and is considered the first superhero since he possessed the power to make people do what he wanted. Falk would further add to the superhero genre with his character the Phantom, otherwise known as the Ghost Who Walks, in February 1936, which is the first depiction of a masked superhero, who would later appear in his own first comic book in Ace Comics number 11 in 1938. It is interesting to note that while Mandrake doesn't have a mask and the Phantom doesn't have powers, they are both considered superheroes, thus igniting the long-running debate to this day of what is a superhero. While we will eventually devote an episode to that subject, I will go on the record as saying that both characters, like the Phantom and Batman, are superheroes despite not having superpowers. Also, Die Hard is a Christmas movie, a hot dog is not a sandwich, and an astronaut would easily beat a caveman in a fight. There, that's settled. New Fun Comics was published in February 1935 by National Allied Publications, which is notable as this would be the first company that would eventually become DC Comics. In March 1937, Detective Comics number 1 was published, from which DC would eventually get its name. Now, a certain Dark Knight detective would not appear in this comics just yet, but another notable character is Slam Bagley, a two-faced detective, did. While this is a character who is not recognizable by most today, he still makes occasional appearances in comic books, especially since he was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Well, that brings us up to the creation of the modern comic book. However, the medium was about to explode, as those two creators we just mentioned, Siegel and Shuster, were about to create one of the most significant fictional heroes in history, but launched comic books into the golden age. Thank you everyone for listening. I should note that my chief source for this episode was The Comic Book by Paul Cecine, a great coffee table book chronicling the history of comic books, and was a gift by my dad, my stepmom Laura, and my two sisters Emily and Katie, all the way back in high school. As a result, it is a bit dated as it is in 1994 and out of print, but worth checking out if you can find a copy. Also, thanks to my mom for buying me my first comic book and continuing to feed my habit. It was better than drugs, Mom. And to the rest of my family and friends that inspired and supported me, especially the podcast I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, please check them out. Also, thanks for all of you for listening, and please join me again for the next episode of the History of Comic Books. And now it is April 26, 2018, and here is my favorite comic book of this week. Saga, number 51, by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, which finds Prince Robot and his son Squire preparing for their new life, while Upshur and Dove, the reporters, are preparing the big expose on Marco and Elena, the stars of the series. Another great inventive issue that sets up a new standard, and also a new twist as new characters show up and more than one character bites the dust. If you haven't read this series yet, it's easily one of the most enjoyable, original, and fun comic books on the stands being published right now. But if you haven't gotten into it so far, you probably should go at the beginning. Highly recommended, as usual. Brian K. Vaughan creates another classic like he did with Why the Last Man and Ex Machina, and this is definitely worth picking up. Once again, thank you for listening, and on the next episode, we'll be getting to the brief and rambling history of the golden age of comic books.